bumps grew so large, like I was growing another head on top of my head. It hurt like crazy.
She stopped moving. She stopped breathing.
I thought she was just gonna die.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. When star athlete Lonnie White develops strange, painful bumps on his scalp, he has no idea that over the next 2 decades, his body will transform in ways no one could ever have imagined.
I look like an elephant man. I could see how people commit suicide from stuff like this.
Then, 10-week-old Brianna Heading seems like a healthy baby in every way, until her parents experience what can only be described as the shock of their lives.
Her eyes started to bounce in the back of her head, and she was hard as a rock. I knew something was not right.
In Iraq, I've been shot at. It doesn't even come close to as scared as I was.
In the fall of 1986, Lonnie White, a star athlete at the University of Southern California, was looking forward to a big NFL career.
I had set a record at USC for the most kickoff return yards in a season. I was really anticipating an opportunity to play in the NFL. Unfortunately, I wasn't drafted. So I signed as a free agent in the NFL, and I was able to make the team as a wide receiver and kickoff return specialist.
Basically, you go to camp just like everybody else trying to make the 48-man roster.
And in June of 1987, Lonnie starts training with a professional football team.
I was so excited about going out to practice every day.
While the competition for a spot on the team is fierce, Lonnie is confident he'll make it.
They test your mind, your body, and your spirit. I consider myself the A1 state of health. I was able to run a 40-yard dash in 4.4 seconds.
But a few weeks into training, just as Lonnie's hitting his stride, he notices something very strange.
I woke up one morning and I realized that I had bumps on my head. They were huge. They were so painful, just on the touch.
He was standing at the mirror and I noticed some bumps on his scalp. I didn't think that it was serious, and we kidded each other about any and everything. I started calling him Lumpy.
It was a nickname that at first I laughed at. I wasn't that concerned until I was in the field. When I put the helmet on, it hurt so bad. You talk about pain. Oh, God. It hurt like crazy. I didn't want the coaches to know, just give them a reason just to cut me. So I would go to great lengths to hide this problem.
And although Lonnie thinks he can handle the problem on his own, every tackle sends him into agonizing pain.
I could take getting hit by a football guy. The pain, oh, it was just terrible.
Determined to tough it out, Lonnie refuses to let anything stop him from playing pro football. But then, fate intervenes.
Quarterback threw the ball up and Lonnie made the catch, but took a very vicious hit to the shoulder.
All I saw was a bright white light. I dislocated my shoulder, and it turned out that was the end of my football career. No more football for me. That was it. After spending all these years working hard, and then to know that your career is over, it was tough. It was the worst feeling.
While he's completely disillusioned by the turn of events, Lonnie now has nothing to lose and schedules an appointment with a local general practitioner.
And the doctor took a look at the bumps right away. He thought I had folliculitis.
Folliculitis is a skin condition in which hair follicles become infected with strep bacteria. The resulting inflammation around the hair follicle can lead to the formation of an abscess or boil.
The doctor said he was going to lance the biggest bump, the draining. It really surprised me how much blood and pus came out. The smell was like sitting in the middle of a sewage dump. and I was so embarrassed. But I felt a relief right away. He told me, oh, don't worry about it. The smell is from the infection. The doctor prescribed for me this powerful antibiotic. I was really optimistic about having this problem solved.
Lonnie heads back to Los Angeles. And over the next 3 months, he focuses on starting a new career as a sports writer.
I was hired by a major newspaper in Los Angeles. I felt blessed.
But it's not long before he notices new growths developing, and they're bigger and more painful than ever.
The bumps grew so large, it was like I was growing another head on top of my head. I realized that it wasn't just folliculitis. Even though I had taken antibiotics, it wasn't helping me. Every time one would go away, a new one would pop up. And the big bumps would open up. I had pus all over my scalp. Oh, God, I was so embarrassed about that. All the other reporters that worked at the newspaper would be looking at my scalp. So I decided to go see a new dermatologist. The dermatologist examined my scalp and said my skin was inflamed. He was concerned about why my body wasn't responding to antibiotics, even though I had signs of infection. So that worried me.
Hoping to pinpoint what kind of infection Lonnie might have, the doctor runs a battery of tests and even performs a biopsy.
But the results came back negative. It just added to the frustration I was going through.
Baffled, the dermatologist can only conclude that Lonnie has ingrown hairs and prescribes a medicated shampoo to relieve the inflammation.
I was very skeptical that this was going to work. I took a shower and I washed my hair and it tingled. And so that feeling gave me hope. By the second week, I didn't have any new flare-ups. And so I was very excited about my future.
Finally, Lonnie's life is back on track. He begins to make a name for himself as a sports writer over the next few years. And he even starts getting calls to appear on the local TV station as a commentator.
He covered a vast array of sports teams in the LA area, so it looked like his career was taking off.
I felt that things were coming together for me.
And in 1994, just when Lonnie thinks his life can't get any better, he meets the woman of his dreams at a New Year's Eve party in New York City.
When she looked at me and I looked at her, we both smiled. We hit it off right away.
When I first met Lonnie, he was very easygoing and easy to talk to.
She was just so compassionate about life and people.
Initially, Lonnie was busy traveling. I worked for a sportswear manufacturer based in Manhattan.
We had a long-distance relationship. And as we got to know each other, I really fell deeper and deeper in love with her. And I felt that this skin issue was behind me.
But just as Lonnie begins to believe the vile growths are a thing of the past, a frightening new development suddenly emerges.
One day I looked in the mirror, I noticed a bump on my cheek. And I thought it was just acne and would go away. And then within a few weeks, it went from the size of a penny to the size of a golf ball. And I was so embarrassed. I was scared to see how serious the problem was. I needed help.
In the fall of 2005, 22-year-old Katie Rogers was working as a waitress in Wichita, Kansas, when she met her husband-to-be. 20-year-old David Heddings, a Marine sergeant on leave from his first tour in Iraq, walked into Katie's restaurant, and her life was changed forever.
I saw him and told the hostess to sit him in my section and was flirting with him.
We only had 2 weeks before I had to go back, so we spent every extra moment we had together.
I knew the first moment I met him, there's something about him that was different.
It just really clicked. Like, yeah, I love this woman.
Just 3 months later, they got married at the local courthouse.
Everyone was not wanting us to do it because it was really quick, but we were ready to get married. We loved each other. After we got married, he went back and forth from Iraq, so I was by myself a lot. It was very difficult.
Finally, almost 2 years after they first met, David completes his tour of duty. Soon after he returns home, the couple receives some thrilling news.
I found out I was pregnant December 7th of 2007.
I was really excited that she was pregnant, and I was also really nervous about being a first-time parent.
As they begin preparing for the baby, Katie and David settle down in Wichita. She soon finds work at a local hair salon, and he lands a job in the aircraft industry.
My grandpa let us rent one of his houses that we had and got it all fixed back up when we moved in.
9 months later, on August 12, 2008, the proud young parents welcomed their daughter, Brianna Paige Headings, into the world.
She looked just like me. It was just the most wonderful experience that I have ever had.
I was happy, I was excited. It was a really overwhelming feeling to hold her for the first time. It was the first time I ever held a baby.
Brianna weighs in at a healthy 8 pounds and 12 ounces. David and Katie are overjoyed. But almost as soon as they take their newborn home, something doesn't seem right.
Feeding her was very difficult. She always seemed to eat maybe 1.5 ounces, and then within 5 minutes, she would just throw up everywhere.
You'd need a bath towel. You couldn't use a burp rag. It was a huge mess.
Everyone told me baby spit up, but to me, this was throwing up. The vomit was projectile. It would shoot out so hard and so much. I called her the Exorcist baby. I was worried that she wasn't gaining weight and keeping all the vitamins that she needed from the milk down. Her behavior didn't seem normal, so we took her to see a doctor.
After performing a thorough exam, the pediatrician assures Katie that there's nothing wrong with their 2-week-old's weight. She's simply suffering from acid reflux, a common disorder in infants. Babies with acid reflux regurgitate their stomach contents because their digestive systems are immature.
The doctor said it was normal for Bree to have acid reflux and it would cause her to throw up every time she ate. He said her stomach might just be sensitive and suggested switching to a new formula.
We tried a few different formulas.
Nothing changed. The vomit didn't get worse, it was just steady. It was the same.
And difficult as it is to cope with the incessant vomiting, things get even tougher when Brianna develops an alarming new symptom.
Brianna would cry so loud, I thought our neighbors would call the cops on us.
We could hear it throughout the house. It was just this piercing cry.
If she wasn't crying, she looked dazed. She never acted like a normal baby. And I went back to the doctor and I said, this is not working. We need to try something else.
But again, the doctor can find nothing wrong with Brianna. He's confident that she merely has a classic case of colic.
The doctor explained to us that colicky babies tend to cry a lot, they spit up a lot, it will pass after a couple months. I did not want to go back to the house and just listen to her cry and cry and cry. I did not think it was common, but that's what we were told.
Despite their misgivings, Katie and David do their best to put their worries behind them and concentrate on caring for their daughter. Then, one seemingly ordinary morning in late September, they get the shock of their lives.
We went to change Bree one time and she threw her arms back. She locked up for a couple seconds. She was hard as a rock, almost like you could drop her and she'd break like glass.
I couldn't move her. We were scared to death.
Her eyes bounced all the way in the back of her head. She looked like a deer that had just got shot, and I knew that was not normal. I had no idea what was going on. I knew something was not right.
7 years ago, sports reporter Lonnie White was plagued with massive, excruciatingly painful boils on his scalp that mysteriously went away. But to his horror, they've suddenly returned, this time on his face. The growths have become so unsightly, he's forced to turn down on-camera assignments.
I looked really, really bad. As time wore on, I realized I wasn't being called for television appearances as often.
Desperate for help, Lonnie checks in with a new doctor.
The dermatologist looked at it and touched it and told me I had cystic acne.
Cystic acne is a severe skin disorder in which abscesses form when oil ducts become clogged and infected.
He numbed it up, lanced it, and the pus and the blood just came pouring out of my face. The doctor prescribed for me this powerful acne medicine that was supposed to dry up my skin so it won't be inflamed. I took the medication, but within the first week, I felt like a reptile. My skin was so dry and painful.
Not only does the prescription fail to work, but a second bump begins to grow on Lonnie's face, and new boils start to appear on his scalp.
It was a nightmare. You talk about frustrating. I was in tears. It was obvious that all my television opportunities had dried up. I felt that I was being punished for something I didn't even have any control over.
Lonnie got very withdrawn. I didn't understand.
I started avoiding people as much as possible. I did my best to keep my skin problems away from Kim, avoiding her when I had a flare-up on my face.
At that time, I was in New York. I had no clue of what he was going through.
After hiding his secret from Kimberly for 2 years, Lonnie reaches a breaking point and opens up about his horrible condition.
I told her about my skin problem, and she was very supportive.
When I realized the extent of his suffering, it was incredibly overwhelming.
We came to some conclusion that she was going to move out to Los Angeles, and I was so happy.
While Lonnie is thrilled to have Kimberly by his side, he's totally unprepared for the disturbing turn his health is about to take.
I told Kimberly that something's not feeling right under my arm, and then she looked at it. Her face told the story. It was one of those moments that you just realize that whatever you hope for isn't gonna come true.
He developed them under his armpits and then in his groin area. When the boils would erupt, they would just ooze pus. I was in disbelief.
Unnerved by the state Lonnie is in, Kimberly encourages him to meet with a new round of specialists.
I went to doctor after doctor, but no one could give me answers. It was very frustrating and taxing. These monstrous things, they hurt, they were ugly, and they smelled. You can't help but wonder, why am I the person suffering from this?
There were moments where we were both sort of depressed and overwhelmed. He definitely became more inactive. He stopped playing basketball.
I just became less and less of the person I used to be and more of a person just trying to survive. I always had a spare 2 or 3 changes of clothing because you never know when you'll have a flare-up and it might stain your clothing. I just wanted to get through the day and just finish my job. And I wasn't even embarrassed anymore. It became a way of life.
As the years go by, Lonnie's mysterious disease ultimately leaves his skin permanently damaged.
I had so many lancings on my face that scar tissue began to develop. And once you get scar tissue, it just becomes like just dead flesh, and that's what was laying on my skin. I looked like an elephant man. I could see how people commit suicide for stuff like this because it just takes your life out of you. Every day I would pray to find some kind of solution for this problem.
Finally, nearly 2 decades since the devastating skin condition first set in, Lonnie's prayers are answered. In the summer of 2005, he tracks down a new doctor who specializes in rare skin disorders, and his gut tells him to set up an appointment right away.
I was on the internet, and Dr. Jaffer was a name that just kept coming up.
On a warm day in June, Lonnie meets the man he hopes will be able to explain his mysterious disease.
He was in a lot of distress and was very affected by his condition, and it clearly had a profound impact on his life. Lonnie presented with about 25 bumps and nodules in the inner thighs, the underarms, the scalp, as well as his face. I'd seen other patients with his condition before in varying amounts of severity.
Within 30 seconds, Dr. Jaffer immediately knew what my problem was. I was so happy.
Since David and Katie Headings brought their newborn Brianna home from the hospital, she's been vomiting and crying constantly. Her doctor is sure it's a harmless case of colic and acid reflux. But now, without warning, the 5-week-old's whole body has gone completely rigid, and her eyes are wildly rolling around in their sockets.
We rushed to the ER. We had no idea what was going on with Bree.
And the nurse says she's having a seizure. And they gave her the anti-seizure medication.
As soon as the medical team stabilizes Brianna, they admit her to the hospital for tests.
They decided to run an EEG to see what her brain activity was doing.
The EEG confirms that Brianna is having seizures, but the doctors are unable to pinpoint what's triggering them.
The doctor believed that she could be epileptic.
Epilepsy is a neurological disorder in which individuals experience repeated seizures. Attacks can be sparked by illness, cerebral injury, brain abnormalities, or have no known cause at all.
The doctors told us that an epileptic might have a seizure here and there, and she was prescribed the anti-seizure medication. I never believed she had epilepsy. I never believed it. She threw up too much that I did not believe that that was the reason why.
Frustrated but anxious to help their daughter, the Headings faithfully administer the medication. But over the next 2 months, Brianna only gets worse, and the young couple starts to feel like they're living in a nightmare.
She was still having seizures, still getting worse, still throwing up. She just looked like she was giving up. We went to the ER at least every weekend.
The doctors just increased the medication and told us to keep doing what we were doing.
Every time she had a seizure, I thought that it was affecting her brain and it's gonna affect her for the rest of her life.
These first couple months were so rough on us. We were so stressed out. We were physically and mentally exhausted.
But nothing could have prepared them for what happens next.
David and I were sitting on the bed and he couldn't get her to sleep, so he passed her over to me and she curled up and locked up, and that was it. She stopped moving, she stopped breathing.
I immediately started giving her CPR.
And I went blank. I could not do anything.
I had to tell her what the number for 911 was. Just a few minutes later, the EMS was there.
We were rushed to the ER, and they wanted to get an IV in. They wanted to get her vitals, monitor her heartbeat, monitor anything that was going on.
Then, suddenly, Brianna plunges into a full-blown seizure.
Her eyes started to bounce in the back of her head, and her body would make like a twitching movement. She would make this noise like she was getting shocked by electricity. It was really hard to watch that. I was really worried I would lose Bree. Really worried.
Nobody seemed like they were doing anything to stop the seizures. A nurse would come by and say a doctor would be by, and nobody ever came. I was furious with the help we were getting. It took everything I had not to lose control.
I would say it lasted anywhere from 6 to 9 hours.
They finally got her seizure to stop by putting an IV directly into her heart.
They just pumped it full of anti-seizure medication.
I thought I was sitting there watching my daughter drift away.
The doctor finally came in and he told us, I believe she has infantile spasms.
Infantile spasms is a type of epilepsy in which a cluster of quick body jerks is followed by stiffening.
The doctor decided that he wanted to put her on a steroid to help with the seizures. I was scared that he wanted to put her on a steroid because she was such a little baby. I believed that we needed to find someone else so we could start over. I wanted new answers, new doctors. I wanted everything to be new, start fresh.
We wanted to get a second opinion.
Determined to get some answers, Katie and David decide to leave immediately for Children's Mercy, a well-regarded hospital 200 miles away.
I was like, we need to go. I will take her myself. And they told me I could not drive her because she was too sick to drive. Children's Mercy sent a helicopter to get Bree.
I ran out to the car and drove to Kansas City, and the whole time I just kept thinking that my daughter's gonna die, but I couldn't get there fast enough.
It's hard to sit there and watch someone you carry for 9 months go through that.
I felt like my life was over. I was completely drained physically and mentally. I thought by the time I made it to Kansas City that I'd be preparing for a funeral.
For almost 18 years, Lonnie White has been suffering from painful, disfiguring boils on his head, face, and body. But now, one doctor thinks he knows what has turned Lonnie's life into a living nightmare.
I had seen so many doctors over the years, and they told me so many different stories. I just needed to get some sort of relief.
Lonnie's medical history, clinical presentation, and symptoms made it very clear that this was a diagnosis of hidradenitis suppurativa.
Hidradenitis suppurativa is a rare inflammatory skin disease. In healthy individuals, the body eliminates dead skin cells and excretes sweat through the hair follicles. But in patients like Lonnie, for some unknown reason, dead skin cells block the pores, trapping the material in the surrounding tissue and triggering severe inflammation.
Dead skin cells slough off our bodies out of our hair follicles. But when they don't get out of the hair follicles fast enough, we produce little bumps in our skin. In response, the body sends white blood cells to resolve the matter. And this results in big balls of pus. Pus is collections of white blood cells, which the only way to release them is by opening it up and letting it drain. Very severe inflammatory responses. The pus has a very strong odor. The boils and nodules of hidradenitis are exquisitely painful. As they fill up with pus and dead skin cells, they place a tremendous amount of pressure on the surrounding tissue. That pressure causes the nerves to fire off and cause pain. I think that the amount of pain he was experiencing was probably tremendous. The inflammation seems to turn into a snowball effect. It gets bigger and bigger and doesn't seem to stop.
Just to have a name for my condition was like scoring a touchdown. After all those years of being misdiagnosed, I was so happy because he gave me a sense of hope and optimism that I hadn't experienced in quite some time.
I felt relieved he found a doctor willing to get to the bottom of his illness.
And as Dr. Jaffer explains the disease, it becomes clear why not one of Lonnie's tests ever revealed an infection.
Boils are not made up of bacteria. In fact, they almost always turn out to be sterile because of the white blood cells.
However, every time the growths were lanced, the open wounds became highly susceptible to germs.
Worst case scenario, these nodules become an opening for dangerous bacteria. And in the situation where somebody is not seeking treatment, that dangerous bacteria can become a very serious infection and can lead to death. Unfortunately, with hidradenitis suppurativa, ongoing research has not revealed a cure. Hidradenitis suppurativa has been known to resolve completely without treatment. There is always the possibility that it could flare up many years later. We really don't understand why it waxes and wanes and becomes better or worse.
While there are no proven treatments for HS, there are experimental therapies that can help minimize the disease.
We decided to use medications that try to treat the inflammation that recently have come onto the scene that we use for other inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis.
Being treated with a rheumatoid arthritis drug is somewhat out of the box when you're dealing with a skin issue like I have. And I was so excited about this opportunity.
When he started receiving the medications, I think instantly he felt a difference, and within about 6 weeks he was clearing up.
Unfortunately, the treatment's effect is only temporary. And to Lonnie's disappointment, the bumps return again and again.
He goes through cycles where things work, and then they level off and become less effective.
He couldn't find anything out there that really will help him.
That certain parts of his hidradenitis have quieted down, his scalp is doing much better, but then there are other areas that continue to be involved, such as the underarms. Lonnie has to continue to be positive and attempt new treatments because there's always new things being developed.
While Lonnie continues to hope that one day they'll figure out how to manage his condition, he can't help but wonder why it took almost 2 decades to find a doctor who could identify the disease.
Hidradenitis suppurativa is an unusual disease that we don't see too often. The severe forms, as in Lonnie's hidradenitis, is usually very, very rare. It's really a clinical diagnosis. There's no laboratory test or pathology examination that can truly confirm it.
For 6 agonizing hours, David and Katie Headings have watched their infant daughter endure harrowing seizures that her medical team can't seem to stop. Now, Katie and 10-week-old Brianna are being airlifted to Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City for a second opinion.
I thought Bree was dying. She just looked like she was giving up.
Katie is met in the emergency room by Dr. Robert Cruz, a pediatric neurologist.
Well, her vital signs were stable, but as we stood at the bedside and watched her, we could see her have seizures. So we arranged to have her admitted to the epilepsy monitoring unit.
He wanted to see what her brain activity was doing.
We looked at the EEG and saw that the pattern was not infantile spasms. That's when we decided we had to be thinking about other things.
Dr. Cruz suspects he might know what's behind Brianna's seizures. To confirm his theory, he gives her a high dose of vitamin B6 while monitoring her brainwaves on the EEG.
We gave 100 milligrams intravenously during the EEG monitoring. We knew if we gave the medication that it would work very quickly within minutes and that we could be fairly confident what the diagnosis was.
We were really hopeful that this was going to be the answer to our prayers.
We gave the medication and we watched the EEG, and we could see the abnormal electrical activity almost go away completely. She stopped having seizures almost immediately.
Brianna's dramatic response to the vitamin B6 confirms Dr. Cruz's theory.
Brianna was diagnosed to have pyridoxine-dependent seizures.
Pyridoxine-dependent seizures is a very rare genetic condition that prevents the body from breaking down pyridoxine, or vitamin B6. In a healthy individual, the body converts vitamin B6 into neurotransmitters, which help brain cells send signals to the body. But patients like Brianna can't process enough B6 to keep the brain running smoothly. As a result, muscles receive mixed messages, which ultimately leads to seizures.
Vitamin B6 is a factor that the brain uses to make neurotransmitters, and that's how the brain cells communicate. She can't utilize the vitamin B6, so the brain cells can't send messages to other parts of the body, to move an arm, to move a leg. I don't think anyone really understands why certain parts of the brain have abnormal surges of electrical activity or seizure at a given time.
I didn't believe Dr. Cruz. I didn't believe that after everything we went through, he's telling me it's a vitamin deficiency.
Your parents thought I was a little bit wacko or something, you know. What's he talking about, a vitamin, some sort of quack?
But as the doctor explains it, Katie and David can see that all of Brianna's symptoms were a direct result of her B6 disorder, starting with the throwing up.
I think children with pyridoxine deficiency have a much, much greater incidence of reflux than healthy children. The brain isn't functioning normally, and so you vomit as part of an instability of the nervous system.
As for the anti-seizure medications Brianna took, even when they worked, it wasn't for long because they never targeted her real problem.
The IV medicines that Brianna received initially have an effect on stabilizing brain cells regardless of the cause. And then gradually they seem to be less effective. Those medicines are sort of stabilizing certain parts of the brain cell, but the parts they're stabilizing isn't the culprit of the problem.
And as long as she went without vitamin B6, Brianna's condition only got worse.
The more abnormal the cells are functioning, and the more they have a tendency to have seizures.
As the Headings begin to understand the true nature of their daughter's disease, one thing is crystal clear. Brianna was diagnosed in the nick of time.
If her seizures wouldn't have been controlled, she would have been a child who pretty much was bedfast, not walking, not talking, and totally dependent upon adults for her care.
I believe that she would have died pretty soon if we didn't get a diagnosis.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for pyridoxine deficiency, but it can be managed. Dr. Cruz will prescribe Brianna huge daily doses of vitamin B6, increasing the amounts as she gets older.
We're not exactly sure how supplementing vitamin B6 works. We presume that if we give extra amounts of the B6, it cranks up the system to work more efficiently.
Remarkably, within a week, all of Brianna's symptoms disappear.
I can't believe that one vitamin would stop everything that she was going through.
Unfortunately, while Brianna's condition is now under control, she may have suffered permanent damage to her brain.
Children with this condition, the most significant negative effect is on language and communication. And she's too young to judge that right now, so we'll have to wait and see.
We are not sure what the lasting effects from having the seizures for 4 months are. They do compare her to kids her age, and that she should be doing this or she should be doing that by now, but I also have to remember what she went through.
Though David and Katie are confident that Brianna will make up lost ground, they can't help but wonder why she had to suffer through weeks of seizures before being diagnosed correctly.
It's my understanding as of 1999, there was about 100 cases reported in the literature.
Since it is so rare, I do understand a little bit that it took a little while to get a diagnosis, but I still believe that doctors should have put the signs together and been able to figure it out.
Today, 5 years since he was diagnosed, Lonnie continues to pursue his love of football as a successful sports writer. And despite random flare-ups, he's never given up hope for a cure.
He still struggles with boils continuing to develop and pain. He has a great attitude.
I've had to have reconstructive face surgery to get rid of all the scar tissue on the left side of my face and major reconstructive surgery done on my groin and thigh area. I'm very pleased with the result. You just have to have a positive attitude. I've dealt with this for over 2 decades, but I'm optimistic about my future.
And throughout it all, one person has never let Lonnie's disease affect her. Kimberly and Lonnie are now married.
Words can't really express how supportive Kimberly's been. She's been the rock that you need to have in a relationship. I just love her so much.
Going through this process has made us a stronger couple. We've grown closer, and we take very little for granted.
Kimberly and I have tried to stay active, and we go on daily walks. I'm still going to be productive, and being with my wife is still the most important thing. My pressure now is just try to live a happy, healthy life on a daily basis.
Today, Brianna is almost 2 years old, and she's starting to meet all her milestones.
I think her prognosis for seizure control is very good. And I think her development is also guardedly optimistic.
I believe that we caught it really early, so she has a good chance to grow up and not have any problems.
In Iraq, I've been shot at, blown up, I've been mortared, rocketed, you name it, and it doesn't even come close to as scared as I was going through what we did with Bree.
She wasn't ready to give up, and I think that that's how she's going to be for the rest of her life.
I love to be able to spend all day with her now. I get to see all these new things that she's doing. I'm glad I'm not missing it.